Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into something really fascinating, the structure and narrative flow of modern primetime cable news. We're going to break down a recent broadcast that moves at an absolute breakneck speed. We're talking about seamlessly shifting from high-stakes international diplomacy to hyperlocal domestic culture wars, all within a single hour of television. It is literally a masterclass in modern media pacing, and we're going to unpack exactly how they construct this multifaceted narrative. So, let's jump right in.
This brings us to a really compelling question, right? How exactly does a primetime broadcast link massive global summits to local culture wars? Well, by looking at the framing and the specific details they highlight, we can actually see how totally different news categories get stitched together into one cohesive viewing experience. We're going to trace the show's narrative arc from macro geopolitics, like presidential summits and military maneuvers, straight down to micro domestic grievances.
To do that, we'll follow this agenda. We'll start off with the U.S.-China summit, then we'll examine the military posturing against Iran, move on to the increasing pressure on Cuba, and finally, dive into domestic politics and culture.
All right, Section 1, the U.S.-China summit, a primetime look at diplomacy and trade.
Act 1 of the broadcast focuses squarely on the summit, diving right into the personal chemistry and the very literal setting of the meeting. The broadcast details an exclusive tour of Zhongnanhai. Picture this, a highly secretive 1,500-acre imperial botanical garden. The host goes into granular detail about the body language between the two leaders, framing them as old buddies with really relaxed postures. They even highlight these very specific anecdotal moments, like the exchange of Chinese rose seeds to be brought back from Melania Trump, and detailing the menu, noting items like lobster balls and kung pao chicken. It's a deliberate focus on the interpersonal and the opulent, really designed to draw the viewer in.
But then, boom, the broadcast swiftly pivots from personal chemistry right into hard economic numbers. They say massive immediate agreements across multiple sectors. We're talking 200 Boeing planes with a promise of up to 750, hundreds of General Electric engines, billions of dollars in new soybean purchases, and Gulf oil shipments directed to specific U.S. states like Texas, Louisiana, and Alaska. The narrative here explicitly frames these deals as massive victories for American workers and farmers, and this matters because it immediately translates abstract foreign diplomacy into tangible, kitchen-table economic wins for the audience. And the framing of technological dominance is equally stark. The broadcast sets up a direct contrast here. They portray American technological dominance as a miraculous and massive lead in the artificial intelligence race. Meanwhile, they characterize China as desperate, relying on older generation American chips, and they even go as far as calling China's DeepSeek leapfrog attempt a flat-out hoax.
So how does this tech framing tie into their broader global strategy? Well, the broadcast hammers home a really crucial figure, 40 to 50%. That is the share of the global chip business the U.S. expects to hold by the end of the presidential term. The show explains that by bringing chip manufacturing back to America, the U.S. can drastically reduce its strategic reliance on Taiwan. It's a key takeaway for the viewer, framing domestic manufacturing as a direct way to compete globally without risking military entanglement overseas.
To cap off the summit coverage, the broadcast brings on guests to assess its historical weight. They feature a quote from Fox Business host Charles Payne, who compares the summit to the monumental Reagan-Gorbachev meetings, suggesting a massive thaw in relations. However, the show keeps things dynamic by maintaining a sense of debate. They later feature another guest, Cliff May, who totally pushes back on this rosy view, characterizing the Chinese leader not as a Gorbachev figure, but as a committed communist strictly seeking global dominance. Moving on to Section 2, military posturing against Iran, escalation and force deployment.
From that kind of diplomatic reverence, the broadcast makes a really sharp pivot to the Middle East, taking on a highly hawkish tone. The sheer scale of their stated military readiness is summarized in one massive figure, 50,000. That's the number of U.S. troops the broadcast cites as currently being on standby in the region.
And they spend considerable time listing the specific military assets they describe as locked and loaded following a month-long ceasefire. We are talking F-16s ripping around the region, 5,000 Marines training on the USS Tripoli, 2,000 paratroopers deployed, and dozens of destroyers on standby. They also highlight these incredibly precise surveillance capabilities, actually repeating a claim that the military can literally read a worker's name tag from space just to monitor Iranian uranium facilities.
Now there is a fascinating tension in how the broadcast presents this conflict. While they cite reports of looming attacks on Iranian infrastructure, like bridges and power plants, they also feature a quote attributed to the former president who calls the media's coverage of the conflict treasonous. The broadcast amplifies this claim of a total military victory, having supposedly knocked out 85% of missile manufacturing, while simultaneously teasing further devastating strikes.
And this brilliantly illustrates how the broadcast moves from raw military numbers to strategic theory for its audience. Guest Cliff May outlines a multi-step strategy for handling the Iranian regime. Step 1 is cutting off economic revenue to essentially collapse the system. Step 2 involves kinetic strikes, specifically targeting military leadership like General Vahidi. And Step 3 is the ultimate goal here, allowing a more pliable leadership or the average citizens to take power.
Let's switch gears to Section 3, increasing pressure on Cuba. Diplomacy meets indictments.
Bridging away from the Middle East, the focus shifts to hemispheric pressures right in America's backyard. The show reports on a really complex situation developing with Cuba, building a timeline that starts with the 1996 shooting down of 2 civilian Cessnas and leads right up to the CIA director's recent high-level talks in Havana regarding the island's severe blackouts and fuel shortages. But the massive breaking news they deliver is that the U.S. is reportedly moving to officially indict former Cuban President Raul Castro for that 1996 incident. They essentially describe it as giving him the Maduro treatment.
To further contextualize the island's internal crisis, the broadcast spotlights a huge claim from Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He asserts that the Cuban regime is intentionally withholding $100 million in U.S. humanitarian aid from its own people. This paints the U.S. as a willing benefactor stonewalled by a restrictive regime, which adds another layer of justification for those looming legal indictments.
Which brings us to our final act, Section 4, Domestic Politics and Culture, going from California races to DEI Friday.
For the climax of the broadcast, macro-global events are left entirely behind in favor of hyper-local culture wars. First up, they target California, explicitly mocking local policies, like plans for free state tuition and a mayoral candidate's proposal to ban barbecue grilling during severe fire weather. They then contrast these policy critiques with the rise of an outsider political campaign, rally star Spencer Pratt. They highlight his recent visit to Skid Row, amplifying his commentary on the dark energy and the perceived failure of current policies regarding the homelessness crisis.
The broadcast then rolls into a recurring branded segment called DEI Friday. Think of this as an aggregation tool. It's used to quickly compile and critique various diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives across American culture. By grouping all these disparate stories under one single umbrella, the broadcast efficiently rapid-fires through a massive amount of culture war content in just minutes. It's a highly effective way to keep the audience engaged through rapid contextual shifts.
Just look at the sheer variety of cultural grievances packed into this single segment. They touch on local NAACP politics in Charlotte, amplify claims about hidden gay players in major sports, mock a Harvard reparations study, cover the Netflix comedy roast backlash, and even zero in on a hyperlocal library protest in Fresno involving a drag queen named, get this, Bubblegum Bigfoot. It is literally a whirlwind of domestic cultural tension, designed to keep the viewer completely hooked until the very last second of the hour.
So, taking a step back, what does this all mean? How does a primetime blend of massive foreign policy and hyper-local cultural commentary actually shape public perception? We've just seen a single broadcast take a viewer from the imperial botanical gardens of China to aircraft carriers in the Middle East, all the way down to a public library in Fresno, California, all in under an hour. It's an absolute masterclass in modern media pacing. Thanks for joining this explainer, and we really hope this helps you decode the media you consume every single day.